This is a very, very big week for the president. He's hosting a hugely important NATO summit in D.C., while at the same time clearly making the case that he is all in on this race. Put into perspective this week.
Well, I think you kind of laid it out, and Gabe did as well. The president has a series of tests that he needs to pass. The first two, I don't know if we have grades yet, and those being the House conference that took place earlier, the caucus that took place this morning, and the Senate caucus. I would say the rest of the NATO summit, the public parts in the next 24, 48 hours are important. But really the big moment is that Thursday evening press conference. And so what we saw happen, it was maybe clear in the Senate today, and Leanne might have some sort of insight on this as well. But the Senate basically said they didn't reach a verdict on Joe Biden. They basically said we need more time. They're in an impasse. Now, since that, we've learned, since they all met, we've learned that at least 3 senators, including 2 very vulnerable ones, Senator Brown from Ohio and Senator Tester from Montana, they're saying Joe Biden can't win. And then Michael Bennet, senator from Colorado, went on CNN and said the same thing publicly. That's the first senator to say something publicly that damning, and I think it's significant, but there's still a lot more time left in this game.
Leanne, what are you hearing about these meetings on the Hill today with Democrats?
Well, first, what we're hearing is a whole lot less than we were hearing about these phone calls that Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, was having with members over the weekend. And that's because there were so many leaks from that meeting. So there's been an attempt by Democratic members to really clamp down on what is being discussed. And I'm told that members are actually scared. Some of them are nervous about saying amongst their colleagues what they think privately or in small groups. But what's interesting is that it seems like that even though, as Hans just mentioned, Senator Bennet, what he said publicly just a few moments ago, and Tester and Brown privately in this hearing, that there seems to be this acceptance and acknowledgement that that they might not be able to do anything about Biden at the top of the ticket. They've come to realize that he is not going to listen to Congress, that he is intent on staying in the race. And the fact that the Congressional Black Caucus came out so strongly in support of President Biden has really made it more difficult for other members who are concerned for Biden to take those concerns seriously. And so people are just waiting on pins and needles. And the fear is that the next shoe is going to drop, that Biden is that he's not going to be able to perform or campaign as effectively as he needs to. And it's going to be too late. And so right now they're just watching. And that Thursday press conference, as Hans said, is going to be extremely critical for members of Congress.
I want to talk about that press conference, but before we get there, Hans, you actually reported today that meeting between Senate Democrats focused more on Donald Trump than it did Joe Biden. Given that, what does that tell you about where things stand right now?
Well, some of that was just a foil, to be perfectly honest. We're talking to senators that came out of the meeting, and we asked them, did you make a decision on Joe Biden? And their response, and that's why I use the word foil, is to say, actually, we should be focused more on Donald Trump. And so that's their way of almost dodging and deflecting the question. So apologies if I didn't write it that clearly. That's what it felt like on the Hill to me, talking to half a dozen senators. And by say talking, I was one of 30 reporters craning to get and to listen to what they've said, because I've never really seen Capitol Hill as intense as it was today. Maybe during impeachment with Trump, it was just a very intense moment on Capitol Hill. So there's just, we need to hear from more senators. Go ahead.
I mean, that's amazing. Just stay with that, though. You haven't seen it this intense since the impeachment?
There were a lot of reporters there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I mostly cover the White House, so I'm a bit of a fly-by-night sort of congressional reporter, and I'll come by there on big moments. So the very fact that I was there, Stephanie, meant that it was a big moment. No, I don't mean to make light of it. Leanne would have a better sense of this. It was very crowded today. It was very intense. And there was a sense that Democrats, because there's been so much buildup on what are Democrats going to do. They've been talking. There's been this private bluster in these phone calls that we're intercepting. There's been this big lead up, and then they finally met, and people came out, and a lot of the senators weren't It was the least talkative I've seen senators come out of a Senate caucus in 15, 20 years. Okay, they didn't really talk much.
Wow.
It was only around 4 or 5 o'clock that we started getting these readouts that 3 of them said that Joe Biden can't win, which is a step behind. It's a little bit less intense, a little less harsh than saying Joe Biden shouldn't be the nominee, but it's not so hard to get from Joe Biden can't win to he shouldn't be the nominee. So I think there's a lot more focus on the Senate in the next 24, 48 hours.
Molly, what do you think about all of this? Because while we're talking about this, Democrats don't have their attention and their voices aimed at Donald Trump or something you just wrote about, which was Project 2025.
Yeah, I mean, Project 2025 is a plan to radically remake the federal government, fire government employees, just end the Department of Education, create a structure in which you can, use the Comstock Act to end the mailing of mifepristone. I mean, it is seismic. It is enormous. It will change our country in ways we cannot even fathom. It is, I just did a YouTube series on it and interviewed a bunch of historians, and one after the other was a gasp. I mean, it is the beginning of a Christian nation. It is the beginning of Christian nationalism in this country and the end of the American experiment in ways that are, just profound and serious. I mean, it will be seismic, and it will change this country in ways we can't even imagine so far. And it's humongous.
Molly, let's go back to President Biden, because some of his best surrogates are his current campaign managers, Gina Raimondo, Pete Buttigieg, Jennifer Granholm, and they're out there on the trail day in and day out. And they're his cabinet members, right? How important is it for the Biden campaign to remind Americans of the great team they will be getting again versus Donald Trump, who we have absolutely no idea who he'll be choosing? It could be a Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert trifecta cabinet.
Well, one of the scariest things is that the person who wrote the first chapter, Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation, he wrote the introduction. He's actually being talked about as Trump's chief of staff, right? I mean, in fact, it's not like the first Trump term, because the first Trump term was disorganized and was filled with sort of hobbyists. This term is filled with maniacal, organized, very intelligent, sort of the think tank, the far right think tank crowd, the Stephen Millers, and they have a plan that is going to be implemented on day one. So the difference between Biden world, where you have, normal politicians, you have senators and governors and people like Jennifer Granholm who have worked in the federal government, versus this sort of these are the very kind of fringe far right people who have taken over the Heritage Foundation and who have created this sort of just add Donald Trump government that they plan to start if he wins in January.
Hans, let's go back to this NATO summit, because it's not just important because of what's going on at home. Ukraine will be a huge topic. And just yesterday, a Russian missile attack on Ukraine's biggest children's hospital killed 2 adults. It wounded 7 kids, and it put the hospital out of commission. How important is it to keep the spotlight on Ukraine during this summit?
Well, that's clearly the goal of the president, and he wants to show solidarity. And in that sort of, we talk about some of his challenges domestically, but internationally, he does have a great deal of support from his leaders in NATO and G7 countries. And that's something that he'll look to tout and sort of highlight throughout the week, that his alliance-based approach to diplomacy and international affairs pays dividends and keeps Americans safe. So that's something that the president absolutely wants to talk about, and he's very comfortable talking about it, and it's very core and essential to his very being.
Leanne, you and Hans both mentioned it earlier, how important this press conference is on Thursday at the summit. Tell us what to expect.
Well, what Democrats hope happens is that President Biden kicks it out of the park. The fact that he is sharp and witty and reminiscent of his whole self, even if he does go off on tangents, the fact that he can answer questions sharply. And also what's getting lost in this is one thing that's frustrating Democrats is that they're concerned that Biden, not about his ability to be president, but about his ability to deliver a message against Donald Trump when that is essential in a presidential campaign. I was speaking with some progressive aides today who said, yes, his debate performance was a disaster, but it was a disaster because he wasn't telling a story. He wasn't giving a vision of the country. He wasn't giving a vision for his next 4 years. And so Democrats are not only going to want a smooth delivery and one where he is on top of it, but also they want to hear clarity. They want to hear Democratic priorities and Democratic values. And so the question is if President Biden is going to be able to deliver on that.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.